Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. What's this? Well, if you're listening and not watching on YouTube, you don't know what I'm talking about, but we're going to do a slideshow this week. As if this podcast wasn't ASMR enough. Now you're going to have the extra benefit of not only my droning voice to fall asleep, but a super boring... No, this is going to be a lot of fun. Got an excellent slideshow for you today. A topic that nobody's talking about, how to solve the mental health epidemic. Well, a lot of people are talking about the mental health epidemic, opining on it, waxing maudlin, but nobody's really solving it. Nobody has the intellectual, perhaps emotional resources to solve it, but we do here at Animus, and that's exactly what we're going to do, and that's what we're going to cover in this presentation, how to solve the mental health epidemic. Super, super exciting. AnimusEmpire.com/schedule if you'd like to set up a free consultation. Yeah, it's a good thing about doing a slideshow is I don't get as distracted, so I can, more boring slides and more of my self-promotion. But if you want to reach out, I may be able to help you. I may not. I probably will. Let's be honest. But if I can't for whatever reason, I'll happily point you in a direction that may be helpful for you. It's just, in all things, but especially when it comes to our personal emotional issues, just reaching out and letting somebody know what you're going through. That alone is extremely helpful. And if you can get to that place in your therapy, that's really important. As in life, right? Just 90% is showing up. It's really 95% in therapy is showing up. 97% is showing up on time. And the other 3% is simply being honest about what's going on. Honest about what you're going through. Getting yourself to the place where you can see your situation exactly for what it is. Nothing is more powerful than that. Just total awareness. And with the awareness will come the change. When you understand how your emotions work, which is we may get into a little bit, perhaps today on this presentation, how to solve the mental health epidemic. Overview. Part 1 will be the problem. Part 2, anatomy of the problem. And then part 3, the solution. Stop me if I'm going too fast. But yeah, we're just going to dig a little bit deeper into this problem that nobody else is really talking about. Nobody else really gets it, but we're gonna get it. And ultimately, the reason why we're talking about this is because this problem is you. I always say when we talk about politics or anything going on in the world, what we're ultimately talking about is ourselves. Especially men who talk about women, you're talking about you. Whatever you say about women, good or bad, this is you. This is you and your issue that you're going through, woman, when you're talking about men. That is a projection of you and your emotional issue. And when we talk about the mental health epidemic, don't believe that is not beholden to that role. When we talk about what is going on with society, with culture, what we are ultimately talking about is what we're going through, what you are going through, what I am going through. This is all us. Maybe talking about the mental health epidemic is just an excuse to talk about us. That's fine. But let's be honest about what's going on so we can see our situation. And if we have to use the lens of culture or society to do it, then let's do it. Part 1, the problem. Man, aren't these slides super fancy? Oh, look at that. That blue and that white. Man, if you're listening on iTunes or SoundCloud or Spotify, you could be listening on Spotify or AnimusEmpire.com website. You're really missing out. Get over to YouTube. These slides are sweet. Let me tell you. Part 1, the problem. The real question is there really a problem? The media talks about lots of things that aren't really a problem, that are mostly irrelevant, even if it's not exactly false. But is the mental health epidemic really a problem? Well, I don't know, to be honest. We're not going to come to a definite answer here, but what I want to lay out in this section is there is something going on, and it is unique. And I don't know if it's an epidemic. That's a pretty, a Fox News alert kind of word, but there may be something going on here that we at least need to pay attention to some degree, which, again, we're talking about us. I think this is true of all of our psychologies. Is there a problem with you? problem? Is it an epidemic? Is it just going to lead to a life of tragedy? I don't know, but there's probably something to look at, and I think there's something to look at what's going on in the very least. This is America, but probably more like the Western world and perhaps the entire world. So opioids, that's the one example, the one case to bring up. 5 times more deaths in the last 20 years. You can't fake that. Like if we, like the DSM-3 to the DSM-4, I mean, they just multiply the number of diagnoses that we have. So of course there's going to be more mental health diagnoses because you have more things you're diagnosing people with. Of course. You can fake that. But the opioid deaths, maybe you can't fake that as much. I mean, that is something very concrete. That is an indication of a definite problem that may be going on. Again, with suicide, teen suicide up 15% in the last 10 years since 2009. Now, again, okay, maybe kids have a easier time getting their hands on things they can kill themselves with. So maybe that's not a definite indicator that there is more of a mental health epidemic. But again, we're stacking the scales. This could be one indication that there may be a mental health problem. Overall suicide rate up 24% since 1999. Again, maybe an indication, stacking the scales. And I'm not going to give you guys freaking citations, by the way. I'm never going to do that. There's this thing called Google. Just Google in overall suicide rate up 24% since 1999, and you'll come up with a bunch of studies. Man, citations are pretty much useless. I mean, citations in themselves are, not that they're always bad, obvious, of course, but often, what did I say on Twitter this week? Often just a replacement for thought. Well, I can't really back up this statement on my own, so I'm just going to reference what somebody else said. It's just like the fancy way of saying, yeah, well, my one buddy said this, or it's like a fancy anecdotal evidence, especially in psychology and the replication problem that we have. But yeah, overall suicide rate up 24% since 1999. And this is something that nobody talks about when it comes to the mental health epidemic is obesity rates. I mean, we can talk about opioids. People are trying to soothe their pain through opioids. Well, what about food? I mean, what food does to your brain, especially certain kinds of food, has a very similar effect as an opioid would. Why wouldn't, and if obesity was going down, okay, well, maybe that wouldn't be a part of it, but it's clearly going up. I say here up 25% since 1990. This is actually a very difficult number to pin down, because what exactly is obesity and what part of the world? Yeah, what's their sample population? I can tell you what's most telling about the obesity rate is that it has gone up the highest in young women. In the segment of the population where not being obese is the most important, it's gone up the highest. Now, it's not gone up the highest in old guys who are rich and are going to do well socially no matter what, because they're old, they're rich, they have a lot of power and money. If the obesity rate just went up a lot for those guys, then okay, well, them getting fatter, them putting on 15 or 20 pounds isn't shutting anybody out. When a young woman puts on 15 pounds, if she's lucky, probably more like 40 or 50 pounds, not only is she soothing her psychological issues, but it's, keeping people out. And recently I heard this, I don't know if this is true, but 40,000 deaths per month because of obesity. That's going to be a really tricky figure to pin down, because, if somebody gets cancer or if somebody has heart disease, is that because of obesity or is that just because of poor health? Well, obesity is linked to poor health. You can be healthy and obese, sure, and you can be unhealthy and thin, but let's be honest about that Venn diagram, how it overlaps. So I do consider the obesity rate and what's going on. I mean, just since 1990, it's staggering. We are eating ourselves to death because we are trying to distract ourselves from pain. 1,100 people per day go on disability due to mental health issues. That is ridiculous. Now, again, you can say here, well, people have more of a chance now to go on disability because of mental health issues, so it doesn't really indicate an epidemic. Okay, well, this is, again, it's just stacking the scales. Lots of things are going on here. This one's interesting. Medication rates up 75% since 1990. Now, this is another tricky one to pin down because medication includes all mental health medication, which would include an antidepressant, but also include an antipsychotic too. So I don't know exactly what percentage of this is antidepressant, like Zoloft, or some antipsychotic, of course, the parent one being Thorazine. But this is a big problem, and we're going to get into this later in this presentation, which I probably need to start going through a little bit faster now that I'm looking at the time and everything. That's okay. We're figuring this out. We're going to get into this a little bit later. But actually, when people go on medication, especially things like Thorazine or anything under that parent subheading, it actually stops them from getting better. Whereas before Thorazine, people would seek treatment, and even a pretty serious diagnosis like borderline or schizophrenia, it just becomes stopped. You get a certain medication and your brain actually stops developing, and you don't get better. It just keeps you at the stasis. And then there's all these miscellaneous goings on, campus culture, safe spaces, doomers. We talked about in the Brazen Heads this past week. Reclusion rates are way up. Dating and marriage down. Failure to launch epidemic, as made famous by the Genius movie, with brilliant acting by McConaughey, or as I call him, McConaughey Sweets. Just we're not moving out of our parents' basement. We're not moving out of our mom's basement, which of course is a lot of Venn diagram overlap with that and the opioid epidemic. I mean, the addiction that young men have to their mothers and to living in their mother's basement, that's very similar to what the opioid does to our brain. And homelessness, we all know that's not going in the right direction. But what's interesting, we've all heard this, it's some variation, but what's the solution? I'll challenge you that you actually have not heard a solution to this. There is no solution that you've heard. Now, what you've heard are, quote, solutions. So we talk about things like helicopter parenting. Oh, the helicopter parents, the way millennials are raised, they haven't learned to fend for themselves. That's why they go to college campuses, and that's why there's safe spaces. It kind of sounds like a solution. So the implied solution there is, oh, let's just stop helicopter parenting. Oh, except the helicoptering parents are part of the epidemic as well. This isn't recently new. This has been increasingly prevalent in the last 50 years at least. So now we're at least 2 generations deep into the mental health epidemic. So that's not really a solution. You're just talking about what causes it. What about decreased religion? Everybody talks about that. Okay, maybe religion does something helpful to our psychology, and we will talk about that. As somebody who isn't necessarily religious, or I would argue I'm small r religious, I think we all are to some degree. It's just a matter of to what we admit it, and to how healthy that small r religion is. But that doesn't explain it. You're just saying what is causing it. Again, confusing causes with symptoms, decreased connection, similarly. Okay, so what's the solution? And the implied solution to everybody is saying, oh, well, we're not as connected as we once were. So the solution is just more connection? Well, it doesn't really work that way. That is what we call circular reasoning, begging the question, where does the connection come from in the first place? Unless we break it down to simpler mechanisms, we're never going to figure it out. No sense of community, similar therapy stigma. You guys know I love ripping on therapists and psychologists. You say, oh, there's a stigma against getting therapy. Yeah, there's a stigma against getting therapy, like there was a stigma against going to an oil change shop in the 1970s. Like you're going to get ripped off. The only stigma is people go to these things and they don't work. And then you feel stupid because the therapist doesn't know what they're doing. And you feel stupid to go to a Jiffy Lube in 1976 because you know you're just going to get ripped off. And then divided bromides, everybody's talking about, oh, we're so divided. Well, I guess this goes back to the connection, sense of community. So would the solution be the opposite? I would argue no. I mean, yeah, this is a failure to understand fundamental issue for what it is. This is question begging. This is circular reasoning. A proper solution would entail what? Causal mechanisms that are immediately applicable. What is the opposite of a well-functioning boiler? My boiler analogy. What is the opposite of a well-functioning boiler? Is it just, get it to work? That's not how it... No, the boiler is broken. First, you have to investigate it. Figure out what specifically is broken in the boiler. It could be a number of things. But you have to look at the actual mechanism. You break the problem of a broken boiler down into simpler parts. Not that difficult for a boiler. Maybe a little bit more difficult when it comes to our psychology and how we view our minds. But ultimately, I think it could be as simple as a boiler. If we just have to break it down in the right way from the right perspective. I mean, just saying, helicopter parenting, that's the problem. All you're doing is saying that there's a problem with the boiler. That really doesn't help. It doesn't break the issue down. Why? Why is the boiler broken? Why is there helicopter parenting in the first place? And it's not just because of the media. Stop saying it's the media. It doesn't make any sense. You understand when you're talking about the media, you're just talking about it as a reflection of a culture, of a certain population. Oh, well, there's the increase in media reporting on missing children in the 1970s, and that's what caused it. Well, why did that work? That worked because there was already a thread of a strain of a vein, not a strain, a vein of anxiety in culture to begin with. If there wasn't that vein of that thread of anxiety, there would have been one missing child report, and then that would have been it, because it wouldn't work because nobody would have clicked on it. It's all a reflection of us. So just stop blaming CNN or America's Most Wanted. Doesn't make sense. It sounds nice. It sounds like it makes sense. And you probably go and talk around these ideas in your ridiculous luncheons, and nobody challenges you. Nobody challenges you because they don't know how to think, because they're too busy worrying about getting the right citations instead of figuring out how to actually think. All right, so part 2. Part 1 was the problem. Part 2 is anatomy of the problem. So we're going to look at the problem from a little bit different perspective, maybe go a little bit deeper with it. I think the first point of order here to recognize before you can even talk about the problem from a deeper perspective is the problem is not new. That's the first thing we need to wrap our minds around. That the idea that there's a mental health epidemic, this is not new. Let me explain what I mean here. In the 19th century, there is a transportation problem. Was that new? Was the transportation problem in 19th century America, was that new? No. There's always been a transportation problem. It was always difficult to get people from New York to San Francisco. But because of, more people in society, more opportunity, economic development, new things happening, it all of a sudden became more important. There is now a demand. There is now a reason to go from New York to San Francisco. Okay, let's build a railroad. But the problem wasn't new. Is that confusing? Am I confusing myself here? What about the 20th century exercise problem? Was there a diet fitness problem in the 20th century? No, not in the 20th century. There always was one. But new demands placed on humans, because again, for the same reason that caused the quote transportation problem, new freedoms, everybody's wealthier. We can now make the decision to eat ourselves to death. Whereas before the 20th century, that would just been very difficult to do. Only a few people could have afforded to just eat themselves to death. Now you can do it. Okay, well now you got to start going to the gym. Now we have to start figuring out how our bodies work. Now we need to start understanding exercise. Not a new problem. There you have a picture of Schwarzenegger. Looking humongous. God, what is... I know compared to bodybuilders today, he's probably kind of small, but he just has... You know what it is? His boobs are just... Not that they're big, they just are low. He has very low pecs. It just gives the impression that he's probably a lot bigger than he is. Anyway, I had to put in my obligatory Arnold picture. So what's the mental health epidemic? Remember, now we have a freedom problem. Very similar in the same vein of the transportation problem, the exercise problem. Now there's a freedom problem. Just a lot of choices. Our identity isn't created so much, or now we have the opportunity, to create our identity more than we've ever had in the history of the world. So this isn't a new problem. We've always had the problem of creating our own identity. However, before, we didn't have as much choice, so our identity was just naturally our community. If you're born in New York, there's probably a very low chance we could end up in San Francisco. Now it's a much higher chance. We have moved away from the stability of how society used to be, and this problem just keeps compounding. But it's not a new problem. We've never had the resources to deal with this problem. Just now, because society is changing, we are, being exposed to a new way of doing things. It's like if you think you're really confident, but then you go and you give a presentation in front of 500 people and stumble over your words. What was the problem? The presentation didn't cause the problem, right? That was just a new stimulus that triggered something in you that you weren't aware of. So this problem isn't new. It was something that we were walking around with as long as there's been humans, but we just never had to deal with. But I think the important question to ask before we can even address this problem for what it is why does therapy exist? Why does therapy exist in the first place? And I really could ask this question, why does the field of psychology exist? Or what is the definition of the field of psychology? Which is something that nobody can answer. People have a very difficult time answering that. I'll say that for another presentation, or if I choose to keep doing this, or just another podcast. But why does therapy exist? Very simple. There's a disconnect between needs and actions. There's something we want to do, and we know it is right. The math homework example, wake up to do math homework, but why am I on YouTube? Why am I on YouPorn? No, don't you see my goal list that I made? I wanted to do that. Why am I watching YouTube? You see a girl in math class? Why do I keep talking about math? Because I'm not talking about me in college. I took a lot of math. That's what this is. There's just a girl in your math class, you want to ask her out, and look, if you don't ask out a girl, she's not going to go out with you. It just doesn't work that way. Unless you're famous or ridiculously handsome. And really being ridiculously handsome doesn't help. It may help a little bit. If you're 6'7", girls will come up to you and go, "Oh, wow, you're really tall." I know that because I had a buddy who's 6'6", and whenever we'd go out, girls would just come up to him and be like, "Oh, wow, you're really tall." And I was like, "Oh, Jesus, dude." It gets your foot in the door. It doesn't really help. And he definitely messed up a lot of those situations. Sorry, Rich, it's okay. I would have too. But there's a disconnect between needs and actions. Which means there's an interference from our unconscious. There's something there that's interfering with us. That's causing some kind of dissonance. We know not what. And this is important enough to realize, because just understanding this, this is what differentiates psychology from philosophy. Philosophy is what's the right thing to do. Psychology is, maybe I know what the right thing to do is, but why can I not bring myself to really do it? I forget exactly what dialogue this is in, but I think this is really the first time it explicitly comes up in Western civilization. When Socrates asked, well, why would somebody not do the right thing if they know it's the right thing? He was inadvertently discovering psychology. Technically wasn't Aristotle. So there's two ways to solve this problem. This dissonance, this interference with the unconscious. There's the bottom-up way. This is what we would typically call psychodynamic. This is Freud. This is Jung. Psychoanalysis. And this is getting right at the unconscious. So using several techniques like dream analysis, interpretation, association, amplification, narrative therapy, what I was trying to do with you guys on the Year Myth podcast a couple weeks ago. Created a narrative for your life. Figuring out your patterns. And this is very helpful. The benefits of this is, it goes right to the source. It understands that the unconscious is the issue. It intuitively gets the purpose of why psychology exists. But the problem with the psychodynamic approach is, there's no methodology. There's no definite way to doing it. What I listed there, association, amplification, dream analysis, those are great techniques. But there's no real methodology, and perhaps the reason why there's no real methodology for depth psychology, that's another word for it, psychodynamic depth psychology, psychoanalysis, is because there's no structure for the unconscious. There's no structure for this thing that causes dissonance. There's no structure for that thing that keeps us from doing math homework when we want to wake up and know, I really want to do math homework. Okay, I'm 2 weeks behind on reading for this class. It's really important that I do reading, and I'm on YouPorn. What's the structure for what goes on? Well, that may indicate the solution. And then there's the top-down solution to the problem of therapy, or the question of why we go into therapy in the first place, and this is cognitive therapy, also CBT, DBT, ACT, solution-focused. Colloquially, this is mindset training. That is what you would call it if you're a man. Women call it positivity. Yeah, you can either write down your goals or send out the positive vibes. Same thing. It's just a different gender bent on the same exact epistemological framework. This is the top-down approach. Well, you know what? We're not going to do anything about the unconscious, that thing that causes dissonance. We're just going to put out the vibes. We're going to set our goals. We're going to wake up every morning and just, write down our goals and go through our affirmations, go through our mantra. And then this will just drown out whatever is in the unconscious. Oh, it's probably not that big of a deal anyway. Benefit of this, of course, is there's a methodology for doing this. I learned how to do motivational interviewing in, 45 minutes. It's really easy to train people on this. There's just a certain way to do this. Certain like tree diagram or flow chart. Oh, if they say this, then say this. It's not that difficult. There's a definite methodology. But, of course, as you can tell by my implicit condescension, I'm sure, it really just doesn't address the root of the issue. Look, I think making goals and doing your mantra, and hey, I live in California now. I'm sending out the vibes. Sweet. Do it. It's a sign from the universe. Awesome. But until we really manage the issue, manage the unconscious issue, it's just going to be an uphill battle. And I think people find, especially when they get really into mindset training and things, and if it doesn't work, sometimes it can work totally, but it's not sustainable. But people find that when it works is you don't really get what you want. You just get the least of what you accept. You don't really get what you want. You don't get the highest idea of what you want in life. It's just not how it works. You get what you allow yourself to accept. And what you allow yourself to accept is a manifestation of your unconscious. Well, really, it's a manifestation of your boundary, but your entire boundary is just a manifestation of your unconscious and how you manage it. So, again, to hint at the solution here, until we come up with a structure for this, it's probably not going to happen. And I just want to say as an aside, because I'm a huge Jung guy, analytic definitely works the best over time. Well, I cannot even to say that. Studies on this are spotty at best, not just for analytic psychology, but all therapeutic interventions. But there's a huge selection bias here. So in order to go into Jungian analysis, you already have to be exposed to Jung, probably reading Jung. You have to have the resources to pay for it. It's not cheap. So it's a selection bias of people. Yeah, if you're already doing those things and if you already have the money, it tends to mean that you're going to be more likely to get better for certain reasons I don't want to go into now. What about religion? I know I mentioned God previously, didn't I? Did I mention God? Well, I think the problem to the mental health epidemic, it's going to involve some kind of religion. We need it. But the problem is, of course, as I was saying on the I Am podcast a few weeks ago, God is dead. This is what Nietzsche said in the Gay Science. Tee-hee. But we still need God. Maybe not God, capital G, God. Maybe not religion, capital R, religion. But, without... Well, I'm going to get to it soon. But without some kind of higher value that you can live for, and that higher value doesn't necessarily need to be outside you, but without that, and without creating a relationship with some kind of God, just a hint at, relationship with yourself, then it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be near impossible for you. No, it's just not going to be possible to regulate emotion the way that you need to. And I go into this in the Animus magazine, volume 2, about postmodern religion. Yeah, we want to be here. This is what a lot of people say. We want to be the Amish. Look, the Amish don't have this rate of mental epidemic, or mental illness epidemic. Why can we not go back here? And I would say, well, because you can't create your own identity. Well, the Amish are pretty good about it. It comes to crazy religious sects, the Amish are pretty good because they have the Rumspringer, right? You can go out and you don't have to be Amish. They give you the choice. But if you go to Cedar Point and it's scary for you, you can always come back and you don't have to work on your identity. You don't have to be faced with the tableau, the perhaps frightening tableau of Times Square. You can come back to the tribe and let the tribe create your identity, so you don't have to make all those scary decisions. But I think that there's a better way. There's a way to get the structure of this that an Amish community or any kind of close-knit community would provide without the, inability to do your own thing. I mean, it's very much like family separation. That this is the separation from the old way, the perhaps religious way of doing things. Just like when you're a child. You need your mom and you need your dad. But I think it's really important for, especially around adolescence, 13 to 18, that the child separates. That the child separates not just physically, we can all do that to some degree, but that doesn't mean we separate psychologically. Now, does that mean that the mom and dad are terrible or oppressive? Well, no, of course not. But it's all about context. When you separate, you still have a mother, you still have a father, but you become your own mother. You become your own father. You don't need to be part of some tight, you don't need to have this Amish setting to have the feeling of it. You become your own community. Become your own mother, your own father. You get your needs met. You confront your anxiety, respectively. That's how you do it. That's how you mother yourself. That's how you father yourself. That's the ultimate opioid addiction. Really, to get through this problem, we need to ultimately see this as a worthless question. Does God exist? It's an important question to ask, and hey, Richard Dawkins, whatever, you want to go out and debate this, great. I think it's an important thing for society to go to, but ultimately this is a worthless question. If we want to get beyond the mental health epidemic or really solve it for what it is, really break down this issue for what it is and get to the root of it. It doesn't matter if God exists. That is neither here nor there. What is God and what is your relationship with God? That's all that matters. Okay, part 3. The solution. Well, there's 2 parts to the solution. Emotions and structure. And I think if you guys have been Animus listeners for a while, you may know where I'm going with this, but hey, in the words of Hugo, it's good to discuss things that have been decided. And it is good to repeat Hugo quotations that I have repeated 100 times before. Hey, did you guys know that women boast of their besiegers when they are distinguished? Or women like fortresses boast of their besiegers when they're distinguished? Really, you guys know that? Have I repeated that enough? Okay, and I really didn't want to use this analogy of the blind scientist looking at an elephant. If you're listening, not watching, you know the cartoon, right? It's the blind scientists. They're all inspecting an elephant. The one thinks it's a wall. The one's looking at the tail thinks it's the rope. The one looking at the tusk thinks it's a spear. One that looking at the trunk thinks it's a snake. You get it, right? We don't have perspective on this. But the only question is that I don't think a lot of people understand. Now, you would think I would say the elephant here represents psychology. That's kind of true. And actually, I'm reading a book in which the author does liken the elephant to psychology. Another psychologist who is trying to unify psychology. I may talk about that book and I may invite him on. I think it's an interesting book. I don't want to say too much about it. But I don't think the elephant's psychology. I think that is too broad. I really think what the elephant is emotions. And why emotions? Why does the elephant need to be something particular like emotions and not psychology? Well, remember the purpose of therapy. Want to do something, but we can't do it. And emotions, hear me now, believe me later, are ultimately in control of all of our actions. If we don't have emotions, we don't have actions. Now, people often equate emotions with irrational. Well, yeah, with irrationalism, that's not necessarily true. A dysregulated emotion, how most people relate with their emotions, it does render the emotion irrational, so their actions are irrational, but it's not necessarily the case. So emotions are in control, yet we're blessed by emotions if we learn to communicate with or appease them. What does this sound like? Now, again, I live in California, so a lot of people say, oh, God is energy. God is the universe. God is energy. Not exactly close. If we want to create a beneficial relationship, a religious relationship, a spiritual relationship with ourselves, we need to first understand that emotions are gods. That is what the gods have always represented. If you don't believe me, go read your Joseph Campbell, go read your Jung, and go read your Nietzsche to a lesser extent. Gods have always represented projected parts of who we are. That's the point. Now, does that make them more important or does that make them less important? I think that makes them more important. Oh, these war gods we were praying to, this is just a part of me? I was just me trying to communicate with who I am? This mercurial messenger god, that was just a part of me who I was trying to communicate with? And same thing with Yahweh, Lord of the Bible. We create the religious experience with our emotions, which you can't really do, because what are emotions? How do they work? That is why looking at emotions for what they are, as the elephant that they are, and not the spear, the snake. Gotta figure out a structure. This is the key. This is the key to the mental health epidemic, and this is the key to the you epidemic. The problems with you. So there's going to be 3 parts of the structure. Integration of seemingly disparate axiomatic parts of the psyche, which, as we discussed, informs a religious spiritual experience, not tacked on religious spiritual experience, but just taking what a spiritual religious experience is and just shifting out some of the nouns. And when we shift out some of the nouns, not even the verbs, just shift out some of the nouns, not even the adjectives, just the nouns, then it changes the entire meaning of that spiritual experience. And then this is only helpful if it informs a universal therapeutic process. And number 4, bonus, if this integrated system is easily adaptable. Yeah, so not only is the system easily adaptable, but the way that it can inform a spiritual experience is adaptable, and the therapeutic process becomes adaptable to people who have seemingly different problems. Like I was talking about. Like, do you think the 25-year-old kid living in his mom's basement, do you think that's anything different than the opioid heroin epidemic, painkiller? No, it's the same thing. And we need a structure, not only to our psychology, but informed by the structure of the psychology and a structure of the therapy that can easily just address these two, and you put them in a room and they can, through the same structure, realize how, oh yeah, we're actually dealing with the exact same thing. Or in other words, we need depth of a Jungian approach with simplicity, methodology of cognitive behavioral top-down with depth. And ultimately what this is religion without face. This is the boon. Religion. Can you guys see my cursor? Religion without faith. Doesn't matter. That's the idea. You want to go back to the Amish? We can go back to the Amish and the way that pretty much everybody lived 200 years ago. The Amish aren't freaks. We're the freaks. That's how people live. Now, I don't want to go back to that. I don't like people telling me what to do. I don't know about you guys. I want to create my own identity. I want to live the life that I want to live. I want to be like Dennis Leary in Demolition Man. If I want to run down the street half naked, smoking a cigar, reading a Playboy, it was just something that he caught from one of his stand-up acts. That's what I'm going to do. But I still want the feeling of community that you would get from the Amish. Who wouldn't want that? Well, this is how you do it. Look at emotions, figure out what they are, come up with a structure for emotions, how they inform our identity, our individual community. And that's what this is. That's how this works. And the boon, it's really not the boon, I guess would be the master of two worlds is you need a structure for emotions. Just like the boiler analogy I was talking about. If there's a problem with the boiler, so what? You need a structure for understanding how a boiler works. Now, what would the typical mindset top-down CBT approach say? If there is a boiler problem, if this analogy carries over to our psychology, well, just fix the boiler. What are you doing? Oh, the boiler's broken? Oh, your life isn't working out? Oh, you don't have any discipline? Well, just get some more discipline. Just make a goal to have more discipline. Get up every morning and write down on your goal list. Put it on your vision board. I have more discipline. Okay. But there's a washer there that needs to be fixed. Now, what's the psychodynamic approach to this? It's just staring at the washer, polishing it up, talking about it for 5 years, which can be helpful. And hey, once you understand what that washer is, it's going to make it more likely that you're going to put it in the right place, that you're going to polish it up, get the rust off of it so it doesn't leak, and then put it back in the right place. But again, there's no really structure. You can get lost just looking at the washer forever. So we really need both. We need to break down the boiler, exactly how it works. And hey, if you want to spend a bunch of time polishing up the washer, that's fine. But that's not necessarily the purpose of therapy. And that's not really what you're doing when you're there in the clinic. Again, animusempire.com/schedule 2-3 free 30-minute consultations. Happy to talk to you. And if nothing else, just hear what you guys are going through. If you just want to call me up and say, Mark, I'm just not interested in therapy at this time. I just want to talk through this. Fine. We can do that. That's no problem. It's just about you reaching out. That's the most important thing. And if you have any questions, animus@animusempire.com. All right. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe. And as always, I wish you all the joy and pain that comes from being in touch with reality.